This is the title of my talk, Quantifying Literature and Philosophy. I am from SNB and SN Bose Center, Calcutta. You can take a look at these three papers. This one is written in 2019, but I've already given a couple of talks on that. So in these works we show that one can actually send a signal to the past, which means you can tell yourself 3 days ago, you yourself 3 days in the past, you can tell yourself to buy some shares and thereby become rich. You can send a signal. So today I will not talk about these works, we can discuss them later, but I will try to tell you how to make sense out of it. So there is a disclaimer, that is, as a physicist we have no responsibility at all in trying to make sense, because we have given very rigorous mathematical proof. We have shown various physical theories can be connected thereby. We have also given lots of experimental data and suggested future experiments that can be done to confirm further, and our responsibilities end there. This is the felicitation party of my ex supervisor, kind of family affair for me, so I can indulge in some atrocities. In what has been explained already in the abstract, I'll do in short. Literature consists of subject and predicate, and for example, book is a subject, and in literature nobody will ask you to define a book. But going beyond literature, you have three elements: experiments, theorems, and definitions. And equations and identities, for example, and experiments or observation, if you find an identity, that is also an observation. A definition can also be expressed in terms of equations. So you have three elements: experiments, theorems, and definition. And of course, definition is a specification or an objectification, and if you can completely specify what is a book, then a computer or a robot can be made to meet specifications: 3000 words, 1 kilo weight, Roman font, and things like that. So a completely specified object can be done by a computer or by a robot. So instead of harping on the example of a book, let us try to do an exercise, same exercise. What is a vector? Because this is something that you are very familiar with. We have tried to define a vector in several stages and we have always failed. And I am going to narrate to you that history as the first part of my talk. The talk will have two more parts, as you will see. So we started by saying that a vector is an object, an entity which has magnitude and direction, but we soon realized that this objectification is wrong, because current is not a vector, although current seems to have a magnitude and current seems to have a direction. Area is a vector, although it's very difficult to see that area has a direction. So we add something on top of it, that you have to also specify how the magnitude and the direction transforms under change of coordinates. And that kind of told us that you have what you thought is a vector could be a pseudo vector, and then of course there will be vectors, Like in the whiskey drinking community, they talk about single malts and single malts. So, if you don't understand vectors, you have to start drinking whiskey. But let's see why angular momentum is a pseudo vector. Because angular momentum is defined as r cross p. Now, if I fix the origin over here, then r cross p has a very well defined magnitude. But then if I fix the origin here, then r cross p doesn't have a very well defined magnitude. The magnitude is fluctuating, oscillating. So the magnitude seems to depend on my choice of coordinates. That is highly subjective. So that is not really objectifying the entity angular momentum. So we say angular momentum is a pseudo vector. Forget it. We don't have to objectify it right away. But let us try to objectify the vectors. So then you may say that okay, P is a vector, momentum is a vector, velocity is a vector, but no, it suffers from the same problems as angular momentum. Velocity or speed doesn't have a value, magnitude. Of course, your TV display will show that last delivery by Kapil Dev was 136 kilometers per hour, but where did you fix your origin? If you fix your origin at the center of the galaxy and do a proper vector, the usual vector addition, rotation of the earth, revolution of the earth, twist of the galaxy, then the vector addition turns out to be 2.5 times the speed of light. So subjective to where you fix the origin. And in fact, if you see from another galaxy, then you will see that cricket pitch 22 yards is expanding at the speed of light, and the cricket ball never reaches the other end. Okay, but in 3D, but in 4D things seem to make sense, and velocity has a magnitude in 4D. Electromagnetic field has a magnitude in 4D, and you can write an equation like this. So this is your electromagnetic field tensor. It's a rank 2 4D tensor. This is your velocity vector, which is a rank 1 4D tensor, and equals to something on the left hand side which you call force. And this makes sense, but you are essentially equating it to nonsense. What is force? A highly mystical object. Force on left hand side is a Pandora's box. So you still haven't objectified a vector. Besides, vector can do some flip-flop act. It can jump from a linear space to a sesquilinear space, depending on whether you write the vector as a row or you write the vector as a column. So it can do vector to dual vector. It can do some flip-flop. So we are trying to pin it down, right? And it's doing some flip-flop. See, in all these objectification effort, we did not give up the notion of direction and magnitude, just added the extra criteria or specification of how they transform. Now, direction and magnitude themselves are highly mystical, because magnitude or evaluation is only possible in metrical space And then, so what is metric and what is space, you have to define them first. And what is direction? Direction can be pointed by your finger, okay, but what if somebody is sesquilinear? You know what is sesquilinear? Somebody whose eyesight has a squint. Sesquilinear means one and half. In Bengali we say ded battery. Now this evaluation is only possible in metrical space. This people did not realize for a long time. Euclid said it very clearly. Euclid had no idea about metrical space, but Euclid said you cannot evaluate. But then Newton did go ahead and say, oh, this mass is 5 kilos, this chicken is 2 kilos, okay, because you are mentally assigning a metric, you are mentally assuming an evaluation is possible. You're mentally assuming a metric and you are not aware of that. And in fact, Euclid told Newton, don't do this, you will run into conceptual problems, okay, but Newton did it and ran into conceptual problems. But let me give you a different example, because this is related to the kind of research that my wife does. So that is in economics. So this I mainly learned from her, that suppose you have 10 shampoos in the market and you want to make a market study. So normally people do market study using a survey method, but often you don't get a very large data, sample data to conduct a survey analysis. And often in survey, people don't take you very seriously. Ranking shampoos, people will start giggling, okay, they don't take you very seriously. So what you do, that you, instead of doing a survey, you can also do a survey and cross check, but instead of doing a survey, you do a focus group analysis, which means you go to experts. You need only 3 experts, okay, and if the manifold has a single peak, then 3 experts are enough. If the manifold has multiple peaks, then more than 3 experts are needed, maybe 10 experts. You will understand these concepts in the subsequent part of the talk, if you don't already understand them. And you ask these experts to rank the shampoos, okay, so this shampoo gets 10 out of 10, that shampoo gets 9 out of 10, just as you are saying that this student gets 10 out of 10, that student gets 6 out of 10, because you are mentally assuming a metric. And if you don't have a proper measure theory laid out, proper mathematical theory for measure laid out, you will make conceptual mistakes. Now from these 10 rankings, they can apply an algorithm that is called branch and bound technique and other variants of it. And this is why I am putting a lot of emphasis on algorithmic approaches. And they can tell you that they can arrive at a consensus ranking, and they can also tell you that, look, this is the best shampoo, it is occupying the peak in the manifold. And sometimes it so happens that the peak is not occupied. There may be 2 or 3 shampoos clustering around the peak, but the peak is vacant, which means there is a clear prediction for the industry that if you can come up with a new shampoo that occupies that exact peak, that will be the best shampoo, that will make the most business, that will sell the most. And so that's like palmistry. You are predicting something about the future, okay, because the manifold has a very objective existence. It is independent of whether you exist or not, and maybe even independent if the universe doesn't exist. You may say that as when the universe gets destroyed, when we get destroyed, the manifold gets destroyed, and when the universe re-emerges, the manifold re-emerges. You can say that, but what Indian philosophy says is that no, that is very, very objective and even independent of the universe. But that's a philosophical debate. But at least as far as your subjective feelings and my subjective feelings are concerned, we can be very happy with our subjective rankings of the shampoo, but there is a very, very objective manifold, there is a very, very objective peak, and there is a consensus ranking, and the market dynamics will eventually converge on that consensus ranking. So what are the conceptual errors that Newton made? He said a body in motion continues to be in motion. He also said a lot of other things because he thought they are so obvious that you don't have to write them down, and people for 2000 years have always taken that for granted, forever in a straight line. What is a straight line? We know that is conceptually wrong. Today we know that is a conceptually wrong statement. A conceptually more correct statement, I am not saying absolutely correct, a conceptually more correct statement is straight line is the trajectory of inertial motion. Well, then what is inertia? See, you can find the answer to this question only if you objectify the manifold. So you thought that straight line is y is equal to ax plus b, or y is a straight line is something that you can join two points with your ruler and pencil the way Euclid told you, and that you get, thereby you get a straight line, but that is wrong. That's why you see this wrong sign here. Straight line can only be generated mechanically. An inertial body in inertial motion, the trajectory gives you a straight line. It does not necessarily have an expression, algebraic expression. We know that longitudes are straight lines, and we also know that two longitudes are parallel straight lines, and they meet at the pole. They meet at the poles. If they meet at points other than antipodal points, not poles, then they are non-parallel. So if you draw a straight line, you can draw, if you draw one line, you can draw another copy of that line, and if these two lines if can be formulated in terms of parallel transport, and so so you must try to frame this problem in terms of parallel transport and not in terms of straight lines. That is a conceptual error that Newton did. So let's see some modern theories. We are now trying to correct Newton. So modern theories, you must start from vacuum, started with Dirac. The Greeks thought that the vacuum is a dead place, ignored the vacuum, but no, they had some kind of psychological aversion for the vacuum. They fought riots over this vacuum issue. But Dirac said, no, vacuum is a very, very happening place. This is a term that I learned from Subhasis, happening place. So, we must start from the vacuum. In fact, long ago Shankaracharya said neti neti na iti, double negation. Today you study that and call it De Morgan's law, but 7th century AD, the Buddhist scholars, Buddha never said it. Buddhist scholars were trying to say that the vacuum is a dead place, no God, no soul, nothing. So Shankaracharya came up with some logic, and he fought debates with the Buddhist scholars, and he beat them in the debates. And debates are fought on logic. Okay, so you never tried to follow his logic. So start from vacuum, and then how do you objectify? How does it help you objectify? For example, what is a 5 rupee coin? If you go outside the borders of India, the 5 rupee coin doesn't mean anything. So how do you objectify a 5 rupee coin? Well, it's the root of a polynomial. 5x minus 5 toffees is equal to 0. That is vacuum on the right hand side. And 5x minus 5 toffees cancel each other, annihilate each other. So that root x is a 5 rupee coin. That is, if you assume that you already have a measure for toffees, 5 times desire is 5 toffees, or 5 times hunger is 5 toffees, so you may not have a very good mathematical theory for measure, but it is built in your concept. You are mentally assigning a measure. Okay, you have to lay down a proper mathematical theory at some point, not keep on evaluating mentally. So then this helps you quantify or objectify a 5 rupee coin, and then you can vary the coordinates. You go to Pakistan, you go to Afghanistan, you go to USA, and you can find the roots. You can find many roots, and all these roots you put in braces. You say it makes a set. That's like putting all the roots inside a basket, and now you get some comfort that now you feel that you can hold this basket, and you have completely objectified the root space in which this measure of 5 rupee coin can be defined. But there is a problem. There are a lot of problems, but you should move on. So these problems are thrown to the periphery of set theory as paradoxes, and with 8 axioms, Zumelo-Frankel set theory, you can move on, and you even keep a provision that if someday you cannot explain something, you can include an additional axiom. And these axioms are not really growing exponentially. So in last 40-50 years, number of axioms has grown from 8 to 9, 10, 11 maybe. If by now we had 500 axioms, then I would have said no hope. But we have kind of 10 or 11 axioms, so we can move on. So let's see what are the problems with this kind of objectification, that you hold the basket in your arms and say that I have objectified the root space. Problems, because I told you that this coordinate can be varied continuously from India to Pakistan. So continuum. Can you connect the roots? These are not ordered, but can you find some order, and can you connect them and form a continuous curve, like a circle maybe. What is a circle? So let us try to address this question. What is a circle? It's a root space obtained like this. But what are the conceptual problems? I told you that you threw the conceptual problems to the periphery as paradoxes. But let's discuss the problems. So if this is a circle, then this is also a circle. And if you claim that this is not a circle, I can always tell you that I can see better than you, and I tell you, man, believe me, I tell you that is a circle. Or some of you may say that, okay, this is a circle, x square plus y square is equal to a. But I told you y is equal to ax plus b is not a straight line. So this is also not a circle. So you see, this is the picture of a circle, but this is not a circle. This is the expression of a circle, but this is not a circle. You have to be very clear about it, because there are a lot of unsaid things, lot of assumed things standing on top of that. You are calling this a circle. R square plus theta square is equal to a. Is that a circle? But if you keep all these unsaid things in your mind and not formulate a theory, a proper mathematical theory, you will make conceptual errors. So what are the anyway, I assume all those unsaid things, and standing on top of those unsaid things, I say that x square plus y square is equal to a is a circle, which means x square plus y square minus a is equal to 0 defines a root space, and by solving the roots I can find all those points, and I can hold them tightly in a basket, put them in a basket and hold the basket tightly, and I have objectified the circle. But the problem is, you can hardly solve for 10 points. Rest of the points are irrational, and then even if they are irrational, it's not clear if rational numbers and irrational numbers together can be connected to form a continuum. Irrationality and continuum are two very dreadful problems in mathematics. And you know that irrational numbers are not numbers. Here is a 2-line proof, you can follow it if you like, which tells you that irrational numbers are not numbers, and Euclid found this proof. And that is why Euclid said, don't try to say that this stick is of length 5 feet. You cannot use units. This chicken is 1.5 kilos. Euclid said this very clearly, don't use units. Irrational numbers are not a number, but irrational numbers can be approximated by numbers. There are several schemes. There is not a single scheme, there are several schemes. One is that this infinite decimal, one is a Dedekind cut, one is a Cauchy sequence. But fine, irrational numbers can be approximated by numbers, but you are approximating not a number by a number, and that is okay as far as engineering is concerned. Okay, a donkey can do the same amount of work as a horse, and so a donkey is equal to a horse. As far as engineering is concerned, that is perfectly okay. So solving for the root space is fine, but solving for the root space is impossible. And taking those roots and ordering them to form a continuum is also very absurd, looks very absurd. But we must move on. How? So now you say homogenize x square plus y square is equal to z square is a circle, z is also a variable, which means x square plus y square minus z square is equal to 0, 0 is vacuum. Now you are talking about this polynomial, and here you don't have to solve, but take any arbitrary values of x and y. There are uncountable number of values to choose from. Take any value x and y. Let's say you are choosing rational numbers because you don't know what are irrational numbers. Okay, they are not numbers. Extension fields. Another approach to irrational numbers are extension fields. But you do not know what that field is. So for any pair of values x and y, you can get a value of z and you can plot z. What you get is a 2D surface embedded in 3D. Now take a cross section at the z is equal to a plane. What you get that it looks pictorially exactly a circle. So what you get is picture of a circle, not a circle. You get a picture of a circle, and now that picture of a circle is also tallying with your idea of root space and algebraic entity. Okay, so you get a good tally between algebra and visual displays. So you can move on. Now if in this space, so now you have a root space that looks perfectly circular, exactly circular, and even a computer can evaluate this root space and also give you a picture of that circular root space. Now in this space, can you define a direction? If you can define a direction, basically it means you can find derivatives at all points. So derivations, so that means given two roots, you can derive a continuous line between them, and then you can call it a smooth manifold. So from algebraic variety we have gone to a smooth manifold. Okay, I have assumed that derivations can be done. And now on top of that, if I can define a metric, then I can also talk about evaluations like good, bad, ugly, beautiful, etc. So this is the approach we take in differential geometry. In differential geometry, we cannot separate the two. We cannot separate direction and magnitude, but what we can do is that we have a manifold. We can take a particular point on the manifold, take a set of all continuous functions that go through the manifold. You have a right to assume that because you know at an abstract level this manifold exists. Okay, you are moving on. Now all this set of smooth curves, you equip them with some operations. You know how to add curves and how you know how to multiply curves. That curve does not necessarily have an algebraic expression, you see, but you can equip them with you know how to add curves, you know how to multiply curves. Okay, assume, and that defines a space. You call that tangent space, and vectors live in this tangent space, and if that tangent space has a metric, then maybe the vector has a magnitude. And if there is a tangent space, there is also a cotangent space, because if there is a tan theta, there is also a cot theta, and the dual vectors lie in cotangent space, and they can still do some flip flop. So we are getting closer and closer to pinning down exactly what is a vector. Thank God, now we really don't have to think in terms of direction and magnitude, but we can think in terms of Lie brackets and things like that. And we can define basis states, we can define magnitudes, because we can define metric, and we are moving on. But let me tell you that all that is fine, but at some point, at some point you have to separate the two, because you know, in the physical universe you have a direction, you can point with your finger, okay, you have a magnitude. We can take many of these conditioned engineering problems where a lot of these unsaid statements are assumed, and the abstract theory explains these engineering problems extremely well, but at some point we have to explain the engineering of the whole universe, the self-consistent universe, where it seems there is a sense of direction and there is a sense of magnitude. So, before I go to music to explain further this, to get closer to what has been promised in the abstract of my talk, I briefly tell you the problem with the measure theory. Okay, so you know this. So this is an interval 0 to 1, and this is maybe an interval of 0 to 30 billion, and you know, it doesn't make sense to say 30 billion is greater than 1, because every point here can be matched up with every point here, so 30 billion should be the same as 1. And it simply doesn't matter if this line is drawn like this or line is drawn like this. There is also a convex line, and this is also a convex line, and this is a standard exercise. You can see this algebraic expressions noted down here, and 30 billion is exactly equal to 1 if you don't have a metric. Now watch this video, V Heart Doodle Music. So Western music is based on harmony. Indian music is based on melody. So these are Western scientists. They are explaining to you harmony, and take a look at this video and see it carefully. It's parallel transport in affine plane, clearly, okay, parallel transport in affine plane is harmony. Affine plane doesn't have irrationalities, affine plane doesn't have a metric. Harmony in Western music doesn't have irrationalities. They killed Hippasus, a Greek. Pythagoreans killed Hippasus. Okay, forget it. Harmony in Western music doesn't have irrationalities, and what V Heart is trying to tell you is Western music is parallel transport in affine plane. So let's consider Indian music, Indian classical music, because in Indian classical music you have non-parallel transport and you have continuity, continuous curves. What is Indian music? Raga. Raga is Arohan and Avarohan together makes a raga. Take a look at this video by Ustad Zakir Hussain. He tells you that how you start from Ga and you have to come back to Ga to complete a raga, Arohan and Avarohan. Okay. So you start from a base point, you do an Arohan and you do an Avarohan and you make a continuous loop. Now during the Arohan, a particular raga will specify some broad rules, like you have to touch knee during the Arohan. During Avarohan you cannot touch Ga, Re, Pa. So it gives you this broad rules and the rest you have to fill continuously. For that you have to do improvisation. Okay, smooth variations of a continuous curve, they are called homotopic curves. So take a path alpha, all homotopic variations of it makes an equivalence class alpha. These are two equivalence classes. You can define an operation. The identity element is the constant curve at the base point x, and this forms a group called fundamental group. Why is it called fundamental? Because it is fundamental. Now once you have a fundamental group, you can characterize this surface. You can find out Betti numbers, you can find the torsion of the surface, etc. And the idea is that just like you have a number, you can uniquely factorize it into prime numbers, and these prime numbers are the building blocks of that number. So here also you can use the idea of a quotient group to factorize the manifold, the bigger group into small subgroups. And also if this space is a part of a bigger space called covering space, it is this fundamental group that helps you assess that. So all that the Indian classical singer and the tabalchi is doing is looking at these building blocks, fundamental group, and trying to figure out the entire surface. And once in a while you find a celebrity singer, Bismillah Khan, sitting on the bank of the Ganges in Banaras, playing the flute and sanai, and some paparazzi spots him and asks him, are you crazy? You are a celebrity, what are you doing here? You can, if people find you are doing this, they'll gather here in thousands. And then he answers, that sometimes we don't always play to the audience. Sometimes we play to the audience and sometimes we play to God. Indian music is to get to God, the entire surface, the manifold, the objective manifold. But Western music, is purely for entertainment. So now that's end of my literature and music, literature and philosophy part. Hopefully I have defined to you what is God. I want to tell you about something else, that is a Sternberger tree. I'm out of time. But so I'll cover this in very briefly. You can figure out what a Sternberger tree is. Now this is so suppose you have a book, you want to get to page 13, there are algorithmic ways of it, because page 13 is pre-decided and algorithmic roots are same every time, it's pre-decided. So you have Newton-Raphson method, etc., to get to page 13, or you can flip one page at a time and get to page 13. But you can also do it subjectively, where you are exercising your free will, that you are deciding that could be my page 13. Okay. So now you want to translate this problem to a book where the page numbers are not flipped in integers, but the page numbers are flipped continuously. Okay. So for that I suggest you take a look at Stern-Brokow tree, and suppose I ask you, what is my 13th rational number starting from 0? What is my 13th rational number? There is an algorithm. The Stern-Brokow tree gives you an algorithm to get to the 13th rational number. And now suppose I give you a single number at level 3,036,000,000, a single number, and tell you that can you generate the entire tree below it and the entire tree above it from a single number presented this way? You cannot. But if you objectify that present single number, allegedly the present instant, in a slightly different way, if you objectify it in a slightly different way, you define it in a slightly different way, you can do it. These are all classroom exercises and you can do it. So here is a small short piece of literature I have written. I have written these because these V's are not properly understood in literature. Literary scholars don't understand them, but you can only understand them mathematically, and they have taken the liberty to tamper these words like anything. I have written a little in the abstract of my talk, you can read it. So let me read this out very fast. विहंक भैरव ककोली का विस्तार से विभोर होकर जब हमारा विनिद्र रात बीता तो हमारा ख्याल में विमर्श था, फिर से हमारा विवेक विलास बहुलता से विमुख होकर विराग से भर गया. What are these V's? When you go from a bigger group to a subgroup, that subgroup must have its own neutral element, and it's clearly laid out in Upanishad that these V's are the neutral elements for that particular subgroup. You know that even in 1D we can define a metric where we cannot have a triangle, of course, but we can get a metric with three numbers, +1, -1 and 0, the neutral element, and they are connected by a formula called the triple quad formula. That's the end of my talk.